My next guest has been a consistent voice in calling out the corrosive nature of illiberalism that's taken over much of the West, with its emphasis on identity politics, the cancel culture, and our growing reluctance to engage with any view that might be different, let alone one that might cause offence. Not only is he willing to speak out in defence of the West, but he does so in a wonderfully sardonic way that's built him a legion of fans and silences, or at least confounds, his critics. He's got a Jewish and Russian heritage, a British upbringing, and experience as a comic, which makes Konstantin Kisin impossible to pigeonhole. Now, I had the pleasure of having dinner with him last week in Melbourne while he's out here for sold-out shows across the country as a guest at the Centre for Independent Studies and the Institute of Public Affairs. He was just so impressive when I met him, and I'm delighted to say, on the back of that, he agreed to join me here tonight. Konstantin, thank you for your time. I'm thrilled to have you on my program. I want to ask you now, it's been a week since we caught up. You've had a chance to get around the country. You've been speaking to thousands and thousands of Australians. I'm keen to hear some of your observations. I mean, what do you think is the biggest challenge we face, and how do we address it?
Well, first of all, I've really enjoyed my time in Australia, and somebody asked me what my take on Australia is, and my view is it's a country that looks like America, full of British people who aren't miserable. So I've had a really nice time meeting people, talking to them. But I think it's a kind of good news, bad news scenario. I think the good news is that you're not anywhere near as far down the slippery slope as many other countries in the Anglosphere, including my own, the UK, America, Canada, etc. But I also think the bad news is you are on the same trajectory. So there is really no room for complacency.
Do you think we realise where we're headed, though? I mean, you know, you and I, we both observe what's happening in other countries, but do you think the average Australian knows how bad it could end up and realise they've actually got a chance to do something about it?
You know what? Honestly, I don't know, because the people who come to my shows obviously are aware of the situation, are aware of what's going on, and many are very concerned. But I also think it's probably quite difficult when you live in such a great country with great weather, you're having a good time of it, to be aware of these things and to be, rightly concerned about the direction the society is going. But I do think that people are starting to realize that some of the latest changes that are happening from the progressive end of politics are not conducive to a healthy, united society. And I think people are starting to wake up to that fact.
Some of the politicians in this country, and I have to say even those on the right, they want to say that culture wars don't matter. And the previous Prime Minister, he's not a Conservative, but he's certainly on the centre-right, Scott Morrison said, you know, I don't care about woke, woke doesn't matter. What would you say to that?
Well, it doesn't matter if you care about the culture war. The culture war cares about you. The culture war is about teaching your children to hate their own society. It's about teaching a false version of history in the UK, in America, here in Australia. It's about undermining the pillars of the West that have made it as successful as it is. And this is one of the things that I've been speaking with people about while I've been here in Australia, trying to say to people, look, you have a great country here, and if you don't need to take my word for it or your own word for it, just look at the direction of travel. People are coming from outside of Australia here. People are coming from outside of the United States to the United States and risking their lives in many cases. Likewise in the UK, likewise in Europe. And there's a reason for that. We have created very, very good societies that are good at creating safety and prosperity, which is the thing that human beings seem to care about. And let's remember how that happened. It happened because we have government by consent. It happened because we have freedom of expression that allows us to produce technological and scientific breakthroughs that are unparalleled around the world. And we have the ability to leverage those scientific developments and technological progress through the method of capitalism, whereby, because we've created an incentive structure where you keep what you create instead of having it taken away from you by an authoritarian, corrupt government or a communist system or whatever else it might be, we have generation upon generation of entrepreneurs and scientific leaders who allow us to be prosperous and successful and safe. So let's not throw any of that in the bin. Let's not pretend, as people are now pretending, that freedom of expression is somehow a partisan issue. I grew up being someone on the left and with the understanding that one of the core principles and pillars of Western society is our freedom to speak our minds. And I feel that that is something that's been under threat. Look at, what our children are being taught about capitalism. They're being taught that the idea of creating capital is bad. In the UK, we recently had a debate of whether a person was too rich to be prime minister. And it just seems to me that we're going in the wrong direction.
Talk to me about Islamism. I mean, how big a threat is that to the West? We watch here in Australia what's happening in the UK, particularly after October 7. We've certainly had some very troubling incidences here. But we've also seen what has happened. I mean, I use the past tense there in Belgium and France. I think they're very far gone. Do you reckon we have our eyes open on this issue?
Well, Islamism is a problem not only in the West, it's actually a problem in the Muslim world too. One of the things that's happened, and you see it show up in the scenes that we saw in Parliament in the UK a couple of weeks ago, is essentially we have imported the civil war that is raging within the Muslim world, where people who want a caliphate and who want Sharia law are fighting against people who want to live in nation states. And they're Muslims, they're socially conservative, but they have no intention of creating a tyrannical, authoritarian, religious, borderless society like the caliphate that some of these people want. And so what you saw in the scenes that we had in Parliament a couple of weeks ago is essentially that the Islamist tail is now wagging the Labour dog and is able to intimidate and threaten British parliamentarians into changing the rules by which they operate. This is very dangerous. We obviously saw the horrific scenes after October 7th here, where I'm sitting not far from here in Sydney. And I think people need to be aware that we can welcome people from all over the world, Muslims and Christians and people of many faiths. But when there are extremists among them, we have to be very careful to protect not only ourselves, but actually the Muslim community in this country and in Britain and in America from the extremists who would, very often when there's a terrorist attack that is committed by an Islamist happens, people say, well, Muslims are the biggest victims of terrorism. And it's true. And the reason is that these terrorists are extremists in that community who are killing their own people as well as the rest of us. So we've got to be very aware of this poison in our society, for sure.
Talk to me about the issue of trans women, transgender particularly, but it really targets women because it's at the expense of biological women. I know you've spoken out about it. It's a feature of the things I talk about here in Australia. And increasingly, women feel, I think quite justifiably, that we're being erased. I know there has been some pushback on this, but we've got issues with the surgeries and hormone treatments for children. We've got the inability to even question some of this madness. Do you think the world's waking up here as well?
I think slowly but surely people are waking up. And I think most people's immediate reaction when they're being asked about, trans women, most people just want to live their lives. It's not something they want to get involved in. It's obviously a highly toxic debate and polarised, etc. But and I've never really wanted to wade into it other than to say I think some of the things that are happening are absolutely atrocious. It's not something I'm interested in as a debating point or as a conversation. But the fact is children are being encouraged to mutilate their bodies without fully understanding what they're being invited to do. And women are being put in danger. We had a case in Scotland in the UK where a man who was a rapist was put in the women's prison because he got a bout of what I call prison onset gender dysphoria, when you turn up in a courtroom accused of a sex crime and suddenly, you feel like a woman. So all of these situations just are completely unacceptable. You mentioned female sports. On my show, Trigonometry on YouTube, we interviewed Sharon Davis, a former British Olympic medalist swimmer, who's very concerned about this issue. And it's an issue of simple fairness. I think we live in a society where we're actually quite uniquely positioned around the world in terms of making sure that women have equal rights to men and equal opportunities to sport and access to all sorts of things. I don't think we want to be eroding those things in order to appease a few people who want to claim that they are entitled to it because they identify in a different way. The simple fact of it is your biological reality determines the fact that you have an unfair advantage over women when it comes to sport. And we should respect women's right to compete against women.